was bad enough, but the researchers were also struck by the fact that the dogs had forgotten all of the complex learning they had acquired in the laboratory. The dogs' memories were wiped clean. The staff talked about the dog's memory loss for weeks, and the scientists wrote their colleagues about this strange event. This might have been dismissed as a curiosity, except that it took place in the laboratory of the Nobel laureate Ivan Pavlov. Pavlov built his career on meticulous observation and experimentation. For the rest of his life, he talked about the flood, and his comments about traumatic stress and memory reverberated widely, given his relationship with Russia's communist leaders. This would all have led just to scientific papers, except for Lenin's interests. He visited Pavlov's laboratory and asked Pavlov's help in molding the new Soviet man to build the new world of communism. Pavlov asked, "Do you mean you would like to standardize the population of Russia, make them all behave in the same way?" Lenin said, "Exactly, and you will help us." The Soviets handsomely supported Pavlov, funded him with over 350 researchers for his institutes. Stalin also protected Pavlov, even during the Great Terror, when Stalin attacked so many prominent Russians. Pavlov was safe. There has always been a suspicion that Pavlov influenced how prominent party officials were interrogated and induced to make unusual confessions during the show trials. Bukharin was the principal target of the third show trial, charged with plotting to assassinate Lenin and Stalin and give Soviet territories to Japan, Germany, and Great Britain. He confessed to it all, saying, "I have no intention of recanting anything I have confessed. The monstrousness of my crimes is immeasurable." Other leading Soviets similarly confessed, saying things like, "There is no country on earth filled with such happy people. Farewell, my beloved country." Observers wondered how the Soviets extracted such confessions. They used a mixture of techniques, including solitary confinement, sleep deprivation, constant interrogation, and demands for confession. They alternated brutality and kindness, all imposed methodically and patiently, like a scientific experiment. Pavlov died in 1949. A glowing obituary in Pravda commented on his accomplishments in achieving unlimited power over the work of the brain. It is interesting that in the ensuing cases of coercive persuasion in the 20th century, Pavlov's name is invariably mentioned. When World War II broke out, the Allies and Axis countries turned away from a preoccupation with show trials and confession and focused instead on drugs for interrogation, or as they called it, truth serum. Could a way be found to extract information from the enemy rapidly and reliably? Could one protect one's own agents or soldiers from disclosing secrets under truth serum? Truth serums were drugs that were redeployed for new purposes. In obstetrics, various drugs were studied to help the pain of childbirth. They became popular after John Snow treated Queen Victoria with chloroform. German doctors found that a combination of scopolamine and morphine was safe and effective in eliciting what they called zombie or twilight sleep. In 1916, Ferris, Texas obstetrician Robert Pound performed a home delivery in a farmhouse using the twilight sleep protocol. He observed a curious phenomenon. After delivering the baby, he looked around for a kitchen space to lay the child. No one knew where it was. When the mother, who was still under anesthesia, piped up and said, "The scales are in the kitchen on the nail behind the picture." House was intrigued. He became convinced that twilight sedation made it impossible to lie. Furthermore, he was convinced that the jails were full of people who were wrongly convicted. Sheriffs, prosecutors, and defense attorneys sought him out to interrogate prisoners to learn the truth. His technique rapidly achieved worldwide prominence. This illustration of Dr. House and a prison inmate comes from a textbook of forensic psychiatry published in Spain almost a century ago. Meanwhile, psychiatrists were experimenting with drugs to treat catatonia, fugue, or dissociative memory loss and battle fatigue. Various barbiturate compounds could get patients talking and remembering. My old professor Lindemann noted that after administering barbiturates, there was a feeling of well-being and serenity, a desire to communicate, a willingness to speak about very personal problems, usually not spoken of to strangers. These observations on drugs and truth-telling were of great importance to the military in World War II. The Nazis experimented on Dachau prison concentration camp inmates, spiking their coffee with mescaline to see if people would confide their secrets. The Nazis noted that the prisoners became more talkative, but were unconvinced about the drug's utility for military purposes. Meanwhile, the United States set up a secret commission to study if truth drugs could be developed to speed interrogation of prisoners of war. Curiously, they focused a great deal on marijuana. The USS worked with leading academics to study how useful such drugs were and to investigate if people could really be compelled to tell the truth. The drugs were hardly in and eventually Justice Potter Stewart ruled that a confession induced by the administration of drugs is constitutionally inadmissible in a criminal trial. That doesn't stop frustrated courts from occasionally considering their use, most recently in the case of mass shooter James Holmes in Colorado. After World War II ended, the world sighed with relief, but it was a short sigh, terminated by worldwide confrontation between East and West. It wasn't just about empire, land, and trade. The Cold War was also a fervent battle about doctrine and efforts to convert the enemy. Thus, coercive persuasion entered the next chapter. The Cold War started off with another show trial, this time involving Hungarian Cardinal Joseph Mindszenty. This slide shows a before and after view of the cardinal. He was an ardent Hungarian nationalist who opposed any encroachment on the rights of the church. He was imprisoned, placed in solitary, starved so much that he lost 50% of his body weight, beaten and drugged. But what got to him most was the solitude. he wrote, "The quiet of solitary destroys the nerves. The monotony shatters the nervous system and wears the soul thin." He eventually confessed to a series of unlikely deeds trying to steal the Hungarian crown jewels. The West assumed that the confessions were elicited through some special communist breakthrough in coercive persuasion. Meanwhile, half a world away, the biggest flashpoint of the Cold War took place in Korea. It was a vicious conflict fought in extreme conditions. The United States was unprepared for the war, sent troops to Korea in the dead of winter, dressed in summer tropical uniforms, and the front moved repeatedly north and south. In the first year of the war, many American troops were captured.